So this one goes back to September of 2003. At the time, I was the technical editor of JP Magazine, and my buddy John Cappa was the editor. And we would have a lot of late nights in the office on Wilshire Boulevard. I was commuting up from San Diego, and I would just sit in the office and wait for traffic to die. And John, I think, was living there maybe. No, we both pulled really long hours. But I was a quick writer, so I was usually done with my work early in the day, and then I was just hanging out waiting to go home. So I would browse Craigslist, and I was known around the office as the guy who would find stuff for people. So at the time, John was looking for a J truck, a Jeep pickup truck. He wanted it to be pre-smog, which is in California 1975 or older, and he wanted a manual transmission. So I was on the hunt, and I found one for him. The only fly in the ointment was it was up somewhere in northern Oregon, but I was able to talk him into it, and I remember his office was right next to mine in the corner of the building, and we never really picked up the phone or walked into each other's office. We're just hollering back at each other from the open doors. I'm like, "Hey, John, found you a Jeep." And he wasn't sure, and my recollection is I kind of hammered on him for a while to get him to bite on this thing. He finally called the guy and, was a little reluctant or hesitant, but it was probably the next day the two of us loaded into my 99 Jeep Cherokee, which I just picked up not too long before, and headed north. So I forget exactly when we left and how long we took to get up there. Might have just been a bonsai run in one day, but I do remember we arrived at some sketchy directions where the seller lived, and it was deep in the woods of Oregon. I mean, his driveway was a dirt road through overgrown trees. It really, really surprised me when eventually this goat path opened up, and there was some open area, and there we saw parked a 1973 J2000 short bed Jeep pickup. It had a 304 engine, the T18 manual transmission with the granny low first gear. Dana 20. It had drum brakes in all four corners. Dana 44 closed knuckle front and a Dana 44 rear. It even had some really cool dual-matic locking hubs on it, which at the time weren't very sought after, but nowadays everyone kind of wants them. But we looked it over. The seller was there. He was kind of an older gentleman, and he had used it on his property, and I don't know how long he owned it, but he had done a lot of the mods. And it had an aftermarket aluminum 4-barrel manifold and a Holley 4-barrel carburetor on it. He had put headers on it, and he had put some larger diameter battery cables and things like that. That was the good news. The bad news is it was also replete with what we call old man engineering. That was just kind of a derogatory term John and I used at the time, but think things like attaching a auxiliary 12-volt wire to a positive source with a wood screw just screwed right into the battery lead. Stuff like that. Just it'll get you down the road, and we'll worry about it later. But we looked it over, and John, had not come all that way to go home empty-handed, and so he forked over the money, got the paperwork signed, and I was ready to hit the road. But John wisely busted out the tools. We had brought an arsenal of tools and some spare stuff along with us. And John started tightening bolts and looking at this and that. And I remember the steering box the bolts that held the steering box to the frame were literally finger tight. And the pitman arm nut had started backing off. And so John in a brilliant flash of self-preservation, did all the pre-flight maintenance, and we fired the thing up, and it ran fine. And we left the guy's property and pulled into the nearest fuel stop we could find. In Oregon, you can't pump your own fuel. So we're sitting there waiting for the attendant to come out to pump the fuel for us. And They had two tanks on it. It had an upper filler and a lower filler, and the lower filler attached to the factory fuel tank, which for some reason we weren't using. I can't remember why. Maybe the seller warned us about it or something. And then the upper filler was attached to an auxiliary fuel tank in the bed of the truck, right behind the passenger rear, or sorry, right behind the rear window. And I just remember when we pulled that cap off, it stank like varnish. I mean, this fuel had to have been 5-10 years old. It was rank. And so John had the guy pump, I forget how much fuel into the thing. It was a big tank. But we filled it up, figured the amount of fresh fuel would flush out all the old nasty varnish, and we hit the road. And we got only a couple miles down the highway, and the thing started sputtering and dying on John. And so he bailed for an exit. I was following him in the Cherokee. And he just barely made it across the intersection of the exit for this highway off-ramp, and the thing died. And so there on the side of the road with the sun almost all the way down, we started diagnosing, why this thing had stopped running. And it popped the hood, and it was very apparent to see that the fuel filter, thankfully, was clear, but it was completely full of rust scale. And so that tank was not in great shape, but we popped that off. I had a spare with me. We threw a new filter on, and still nothing. We weren't getting fuel up into that line. So John surmised that it had a plugged fuel pickup. And so we grabbed the power tank I had brought and shot some compressed CO2 into that thing and freed up the line, fired it up, and figured that was a good place to call it a day. And so my recollection is there was a hotel right on that exit, and so we went and got rooms for the night, and the next morning we attacked the thing in the hotel parking lot. And so things always look different in the light of day, and this one was no exception. And so John dove under the hood and pulled by. It took only a couple feet, and that new filter that we had put on the day before was already kind of getting crunchy looking. And so we just gave it a quick once over, replaced the fuel filters again, and then kind of took a closer look at the fuel system that was in it. There was, I think, a line that came off a valve that split tanks. You could split the pickup from the stock tank and the aftermarket tank, and it was a T. And one of the rubber lines was installed in such a way that it was literally laying on top of the exhaust pipe on the driver's side. And the guy's fix, instead of going and getting a 90-degree elbow to reroute it, was to just wrap that pipe in heat thermal shield. So really sketchy, but somehow we threw new filters in it, configured the line so we wouldn't die in a fiery wreck, and filled off all the 90 weight. John topped off the Dana 20 and made sure the T18 and the Dana 44 rear was full of fuel. And it was funny, the valve that it looked like an old bicycle. The handle for the selector on the fuel tanks looked like an old bicycle thumb shifter from like a 10-speed or something. And it was buried so deep in the shag carpet, the home carpet that he had put in there. It was comical. But we got on down the road again, and it was going all right, but we we decided to do some like car-to-car photography, and so John's in the outside lane, and I was passing him, and I snapped this photo trying to get a good pan blur, and literally a millisecond after I hit the shutter on the image, the whole Jeep was just enveloped in a cloud of vapor. So the upper radiator hose had let go. So John bailed for the shoulder. I pulled in right in front of him, and we kind of assessed the situation. And thankfully, the upper radiator hose where it popped, it was such that John just had to cut off that bad section, and there was enough stretch where he could just connect it to the upper inlet or the upper bung of the radiator. But we were out of fluid, so we didn't have any drinking water on us. Maybe we had a couple bottles and we put that in, but it was still like the radiator was empty. So thankfully it was Oregon. So I just hopped in the Cherokee and went on ahead. And I think I found a little stream on the side of the highway. I pulled off and filled every container I had, and then circled back, came back to John, and we topped that thing off, and made it a little further down the road. We continued on. We remembered on the way up seeing some stainless steel Jeep bodies that had been imported from the Philippines. We knew about them, but we hadn't seen any in person. And so we pulled off the side of the road to check these things out. And they had a whole parking lot full of them. But when we got back in to continue on down the road, the J truck really didn't seem to want to start. So it was protesting. So there was a part, we looked, and there was a parts store, one exit down. So we wound up going there and, dove under the hood again and replaced all the filters again. And it still didn't want to push any fuel up into the carburetor. And so we pulled the carb inlet off, and the inlet screen was completely just jammed full of rust particles. And so it seemed no matter how many filters we put in this thing, it was just going to keep belching out rust. So in hindsight, the smart thing would have been to get a container and drain that tank out and then flush it with about a gallon or two of fuel just to kind of get all those big chunks out. But we were committed because we had filled that thing, with a good deal of fuel. So, and it was about this time also that we noticed, even with that screen cleaned, we still weren't getting very much fuel coming up to the carburetor. And so we thought that either by age or from pushing all those chunks through it, the diaphragm and the mechanical fuel pump had started to give up the ghost. And so, again, there was the next auto parts store. We pulled in and bought a fuel pump right as they were closing. The guy really didn't even want to let us in, but John kind of talked him into it. And so we bought the fuel pump for a Jeep V8, came back out in the parking lot, and it did not fit. It was different than the factory pump. And there's a year split, and as I sit here narrating this, I can't remember what it is. But once we discovered we were kind of up a creek without a boat, the parts store, all the employees had gone home, and so we were in this little town somewhere in southern Oregon or northern California, I can't remember which, and all the parts stores had closed. So we once again got a hotel. I think John put the factory pump back in, and it was good enough to limp to the hotel parking lot. I don't remember leaving the truck there. But we got a hotel room, had a nice dinner. It was, a nice, for me, it was a great vacation. It wasn't my money. It wasn't my problem. I could always get in the Cherokee and go home. But the next morning, we kind of looked at each other and said, you know what? We've got a magazine expense budget here. What are we doing nickel and diming this thing? So John goes into a parts store, and he bought a brand new carburetor. If memory serves, it was a Holley 1850 600 CFM vacuum secondary, which I think was a little bigger than the one that was on the engine. I think it had a 390, but hey, it's the one they had on the shelf. We bought every fuel filter they had in the building. We bought fuel hose and all sorts of stuff, and they did not have the right fuel pump. So while John went back inside to kind of come up with a plan B, I was calling stores to try to figure out where we could find a pump. John came out, and his solution was to rig up an electric pump, but without a regulator. Apparently, they didn't have a low-pressure regulator for this thing. And so his solution was to, because with the pump running just at full bore, it was pushing fuel right past the needle in the carburetor. It was just glugging fuel all over the place. And so he put a pair of vice grips on there to partially crimp off the hose. And I'm like, you really trust that? He's like, it'll be fine. And I think my comment that talked him out of it was not if the thing burns down, but when it burns down, go on the side of the road and I'll come. So I think hearing that certainty that I really thought it was going to go up in a ball of flame, I think cooler heads prevailed, and we left the truck there, went and got the right fuel pump somewhere, and finally came back and put it in on the side of the road there in the parking lot of the parts store. Changed all the filters a couple more times, but for the rest of the journey, once we hit California and around, once we got to Mount Shasta, I think the thing was kind of running okay. It blew a little oil smoke here and there, but it went down the road just fine, and we hightailed it the rest of the way in one shot to John's house. And once he got it home, then he really started fixing it up and ultimately put rock wheels under it, and it became the Hot Dog, Project Hot Dog. And the way that name came about, we had discovered at some point, or John discovered at some point, that it had been in some kind of accident. So the frame was just a little bit bent. So it had a little, the front and rear bumpers had a little upward tilt to it. And so I think it was me that came up with the name Hot Dog, because it was bent in the middle and you're not really sure what's in it. But that's the story of going up to buy a clapped out 73 J2000 with my good buddy. If you have not done something similar, I highly recommend it. It's a ton of fun, especially if your friend is the one footing the bill.